Hello, students. This is Mrs. Moore's History, and this is the fourth lecture on the American Revolution. And you will recall that last time we looked in detail at the Declaration of Independence. May have been a little tedious, but still very useful. And then we began talking about the Battle of Trenton. And so that's what we're going to continue doing today. And I'd like the overarching question, the thing for you to be pondering this time, to be, how does the king of the most powerful nation in the world feel about losing to rebels? Because he's starting to lose, or at least it feels like losing to him when he's not winning as easily as he thought he would. What? Wait a minute. Give that here. What is this, a note? I don't know how y'all did this, but there's a note in the middle of my lecture. Let's look at this. Mrs. Moore is the greatest teacher in the world. I know that. Okay. What else do you have? Give it here. You're brushing your hair in class again? No. And what do you have? What? I've told you girls not to curl each other's hair in class. This is a history class, not a beauty salon. Oh, give it up. There's one last thing. Give it up. Give it up. Eyelash curler. If I'm in the middle of lecturing you, I don't want to see this. Eyelash curling. Do I have everything? I think I do. Can we get down to business? Are we beautiful enough? Have we passed our notes? Have we curled our hair? Have we combed? Have we done all of this? I think we have. And now we can go ahead and, my daughter wants her comb back. Now we can go ahead and get to the business of history. All right, very good. So let's see. We were talking last time about the Battle of Long Island and how Howe's army, British General Howe's army, had landed on Long Island, and 1,400 Americans were killed. And we went on to talk about Nathan Hale's story of being a spy going behind enemy lines for George Washington, and how that he needed to kind of find out what the British were up to next, and he did so, but he was captured and hung without a trial and famously said beforehand, "I regret that I have but one life to give for my country." Very good. So let's go on here. All right. So the people of Boston, they're going to remain pretty loyal to the American cause. We're going to have more heroes. A hero named Haym Solomon, a Jewish immigrant from Poland. He was arrested by the British in September of 1776, and he was imprisoned. His crime was financially backing America. He gave loans to the American government and the army for soldiers. He gave loans for equipment. So that is one way that you can definitely help without taking part in the fighting itself, providing money. All right, so this is something he did, helping the patriot cause. So one thing he did was he left Boston and hid in Pennsylvania, continuing to help the American cause. The British tried to catch him and could not. All right, so let's look at the Battle of Trenton. I want to show you a map here. Let's see, here it is. Now, Trenton, we're talking about the area on this map of basically New Jersey. So you're going to be thinking about, let me get this perfectly for you. So New York, where my index finger is pointing, New York, New Jersey, this area here, okay? So we're zeroing in on that. I'm going to show you the Battle of Trenton. Again, since you're at home here, you can easily pause this, look at it carefully, all right? So let me tell you some of these details here, all right? So in December of 1776, the months of hard campaigning had caught up to the soldiers. Now you'll remember that I told you before that where did page 10 go? That I told you before that the British kept surrounding and invading and being pushed aside and having to retreat and things of that nature. So The months of hard campaigning began to catch up with the Continental Army. George Washington described his troops as sick, dirty, and so thinly clad as to be unfit for service, and some soldiers began to desert, which is what happens when things get rough. It began to seem hopeless, this winter did. And then George Washington did what we might call in sports a Hail Mary pass, apparently made famous by the great Roger Staubach, I am told, a Dallas Cowboys quarterback. He had a surprise attack on Trenton, New Jersey. Again, I'll show you the map here. And this is the famous story where Washington crosses the Delaware, which is completely unexpected because it is winter time. It's not the time really to try to go across the water, but he does so. The Delaware River separated the British in Trenton and the Americans and soldiers. Oh, excuse me. Let me restate that. The Delaware River is going to separate the Americans. See the Delaware River? It's going to separate the Americans and the British, all right? And so the British guarding Trenton would not expect an attack from across the river. And this is then this famous painting of Christmas night. Pretty beautiful. There we go. Of Washington crossing the Delaware, and you see all the ice. And if you look in the background of the painting, which we don't look at as much because we're always sort of focused on Washington and those gentlemen in the boat with him, you see horses being shipped across. And think of all of the required food and weaponry and all of that. So it's quite an endeavor. So they sneak across the river. Washington led his troops across the icy river, and some of the men had no shoes. They had rags on their feet. And this battle that's going to come is known as the Battle of Trenton. So the Americans surprised the Hessian, so that is the German mercenaries, the troops guarding Trenton, and they took them prisoner. All right, and I have a story for you in my book here. I do believe it is on page 22, am I right? Yes, I am. Bear with me one moment. Think your own thoughts, but not for too long. All right. 22. Okay. So here, this is called a Christmas surprise. General Howe, the leader of the British troops, led his army toward Philadelphia. It seemed he was going to try to capture the men in Congress. This would have ruined the Patriot cause. So Washington, so that's pretty amazing to capture the statesmen. Okay, this would have ruined the Patriot cause. So Washington moved his army between Howe and Philadelphia. There was a battle, and Washington had to retreat before the larger British army could overtake them. To get away, Washington crossed the Delaware River. He collected all the boats he could find for many miles up and down the river, and the British had no way to follow him. They decided to wait until the river froze over so they could cross on the ice. Many of the British officers began to think the war was almost over. They're feeling pretty confident. They went back to New York to spend the Christmas holiday having parties and feasts. But Washington had a Christmas surprise in store for them. Christmas Day came. Several hundred Hessian soldiers camped at Trenton, New Jersey, 9 miles from Washington's camp. Hessians were German soldiers King George had hired to help fight against the Patriots. He found it hard to hire enough English soldiers for the war because many Englishmen did not want to fight against their colonist brothers in America. So you'll remember we talked about how the Americans and the British, they have family in common, they have ancestry in common. All right. Washington had a plan to attack the Hessians on Christmas night. He would surprise them and win a great victory. If he won, the starving American soldiers would be encouraged and keep on fighting. And then the other patriots would gain courage too. So a lot is riding upon what happens here. So Washington gathered his boats. He had large rafts for the horses and cannons. Wow, it's hard to imagine a boat that can hold a cannon. It was so cold that large chunks of ice floated in the river, as we saw in the painting. His men pushed them out of the way with poles and paddles. Then they reached the other shore and marched through a terrible winter storm to surprise the Hessians. The Hessians had been celebrating Christmas. There had been much eating and drinking. When the Americans charged through Trenton, most of them were asleep. They never suspected that the American army would try to move across the icy river and march through falling ice and snow. Their leader was killed, and over 1,000 Hessian soldiers were captured. Washington had won again. All right, so very good. The Americans took many of the Hessian troops prisoner. So British general, of course the British are going to have a reaction to this, and British General Charles Cornwallis set out to retake Trenton and capture Washington himself. So on January 2nd, 1777, he thought he had Washington by spotting his campfire. So a scout had spotted the campfire. But Washington, the wily fox, had tricked him, leaving the fire and slipping behind the British forces marching toward Princeton. Sometimes we know a trick is the way to win, to outthink the enemy. So how did King George, and this gets to the larger question I asked you at the beginning of this film, lecture. How did King George and Parliament view the British Army's progress? So how are they feeling about this not being a slam dunk for them? They were dismayed. The rebels hadn't been crushed instantly. Okay, and so what is the result? So what plan do the British hatch in hopes of bringing the war to a quick and decisive end? A few different things. So early in 1777, General John Burgoyne presented a new plan for victory. He said the British troops should cut off New England from other colonies, which will bring an end to the war. So kind of separating, we'll talk about how they're going to do this exactly. But if we can kind of separate this section where a lot of the Patriot activity is from the middle colonies and the southern colonies and get rid of their ability to access Canada, these waterways, we can win. Burgoyne wanted 3 British armies to march on Albany. Okay, so Albany we know. Remember the Albany plan? Ben Franklin's idea? Albany we know here in New York. See, Albany. Let's see. Burgoyne wanted 3 British armies to march on Albany, New York, from different directions, thus, closing in on the American forces there. They would then control the Hudson River, which meant the flow of supplies and soldiers from the northeast to Washington's army, who are now up in that northern area. And we see, the Hudson River, that leads nearly up to the St. Lawrence, unless it is, through the very north of the state of New York. Let me find map 8 to show you. This is the planned invasion of 1777. Okay, so have a quick look. You can pause it again. And what you see with these different colored lines is the 3 different armies that are going to encircle and then enclose Albany, the 3 British armies. And we see how, the Hudson River does join with the St. Lawrence River and then all the way up to Quebec. This is a pretty smart plan. What they would like to do. So, King George III demanded that General Howe capture Philadelphia before marching to Albany. Okay, so Philadelphia, this is where much of the action of American government is, and he wants to get those traitors, just grab them, hang them. That's what he would like to do. And he made that exact angry face. So basically, this is going to become General Howe versus George Washington. So in July of 1777, Howe sailed from New York to Chesapeake Bay, then marched to Philadelphia. He captured Philadelphia. He defeated the Americans at the battles of Brandywine and Germantown. Then both Howe and Washington had to take a break. Meanwhile, the British armies under Burgoyne were marching from Canada to South Albany. So Burgoyne, they're the light brown route here. Okay, so they're marching again from Canada south to Albany. They tried to take a fort called Fort Stanwix. A strong American army led by Benedict Arnold, a name we should all know, drove them back. And this is then going to take us to the Battle of Saratoga. And I have a couple more maps to show you. So this map is called the Saratoga Campaign. All right, and you can see the line here between New York and New Hampshire. Oops, New York and New Hampshire. If I show you more clearly here, you may remember how Vermont doesn't really quite exist as a colony yet. So if we see New York, imagine it sharing a boundary with New Hampshire, okay? So have a look at this. And this is, yep, 1777. This is going to be July 7th through September 19th of 1777, the plans of battle. And then this is going to be September 19th, what's happening with the action of the battle. Again, you can pause and look at this. And then here, Second Battle of Saratoga. All right. So, and that's going to take place October 7th, 1777. And again, I've told you guys, alas, I'm not a military historian when it comes to that sort of strategy. I'm more of a theorist and people-driven historian. But you can, of course, look carefully at these maps. I know if you're interested, I think West Point online has great maps. Think about how neat it would be to be a military historian. So, going on. So this is going to be the Battle of Saratoga. Burgoyne and his men were trying to capture Albany, while Howe rested in Philadelphia, again taking a break, he and George Washington taking a break. That wasn't part of the plan. Further creating difficulties for Burgoyne, his army was slow due to moving supplies in heavy carts through woods. Okay, so this is a problem, again, of America's frontier, its terrain, all right? The Patriots made it more difficult. They used their familiarity with the terrain against the enemy by cutting down trees, making it more difficult to pull all the supplies through, and then damming up streams. So imagine if you're trying on a raft to get materials somewhere, you run into a dam that's been created. So, however, Burgoyne did recapture Fort Ticonderoga. Yet, when he sent the troops to Vermont for food and horses, the Patriots then attacked the Redcoats there. And so, at the Battle of Bennington, the Americans captured or wounded nearly 1,000 British. Then the Green Mountain Boys, you'll remember those guys and Ethan Allen taking those initial cannons from Fort Ticonderoga. They showed up and surrounded the British in the village of Saratoga. Burgoyne tried to break free, but the Americans prevailed. Burgoyne was then trapped, and he surrendered his entire army to the Americans on October 17th, 1777. And I have a painting which renders this, an artist's rendering. Let's see, page 67. All right, so here we have, this is surrender of British General John Burgoyne at Saratoga with the American General Horatio Gates with his arms spread. So take a look, kind of a cool painting. So partially the British are surrendering, not entirely, but part of the army here. This is a huge boost in morale for the Americans, this victory. It was a major victory for the Americans, and it ended the British threat to the northeast. So ended the threat of kind of New York and up here. Ended the British threat. We're going to see then the action of war is logically going to move down here and partly at the sea. We're going to see that, okay? So the question needs to be asked, how was the Battle of Saratoga an important victory for America? Well, first, ends the British threat to the northeast, boosted America's spirits because Washington's army was losing in the south. So it's good to have a victory somewhere. And also, this is very important, this convinced the French to ally with the US. And again, an ally is someone who is going to aid you in war. It depends on what degree they're going to aid you to, whether it's financially or with troops or a declaration of war themselves. That depends. So getting the French into the war, let's talk about what this looks like. All right. How was Europe involved in the war? This is our next big question. So the Continental Congress hoped the French would provide aid, so in the form of troops and money. In 1776, they sent Ben Franklin, adored by all. He especially was thought to be interesting, charming, witty, and these are things that French society really values. How witty are you? Are you quaint? Because he was quite different. He didn't go by the fashion of the times. He didn't wear his wig like most men of the times did. So he was really well liked. They sent him to Paris to persuade Louis XVI, the French king, to give America weapons and other supplies. Congress also hoped the French would declare war on Britain. So think about a couple of things here. First of all, this is reasonable to consider because remember in the 7 Years' War that France and Britain had recently fought and the French lost. And so there's still some bitterness there. They lost Quebec. They lost a lot of land to the British. And they had also been rivals throughout history. Really, the first time we're going to see the French and the British come together is World War I, and they're going to have to put aside centuries of antipathy, many times based on power, on religion, in order to come together to face a greater enemy, which that's the Germans, all right? So, but there's still bitterness here, so that makes the French a good choice. However, here's something we should all be thinking about. When you are rebelling, when your nation is rebelling against a king, isn't it a bit risky if you're a king to help a group of people overthrow their king? Think about that. The Americans are fighting against the whole concept of monarchy. And so for the French to aid that could, and it does, give their own people ideas about the way French society is structured and ordered. So that is problematic. So that needs to be considered. However, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I think that was a stronger feeling for Louis XVI. So once, basically, let's see, Louis XVI, he was very careful. He only wanted to help the Americans if they proved they could win. Well, this makes sense. Who wants to side with the losers, and who wants to lose money and men for a fruitless cause? And plus, then you look less powerful to your rival. You want to win against your rival. So, Louis XVI, he was careful. After the Battle of Saratoga, he felt the Americans could win. And so, there has to be an official alliance, which means a treaty. It isn't just two guys in a bar, spit in hands, shake hands, you know, blood brothers. No, it's not like that, okay? So in February of 1778, the French thus recognized the U.S. and signed a treaty with her. Now think about this. They are recognizing the United States as their own sovereign country. Sovereign meaning they have the right to rule themselves. They have the power. So they agreed to provide military aid. Later on, we're going to see the Netherlands and Spain are also going to provide loans to the Americans. So the question we may have is, did any other European individuals impact the war effort? So yes, the answer is yes. There are some foreign individuals of distinction, so of importance, that really helped in the war effort. First, Marquis de Lafayette, a young French nobleman, convinced France to send thousands of trained soldiers to help with the Patriot cause. He also fought at Brandywine and became one of Washington's trusted friends. Next, we have Friedrich von Steuben, and I'm sure I could say that sounding much more German, but he was from the German state of Prussia. Again, reminder, Germany as yet doesn't exist. Prussia is that militaristic principality in what will become Germany, but they're all people of the same descent and language. Okay, he helped train Washington's troops to march and drill. Boy, you want a Prussian helping you train your soldiers to march and drill because they really know what they're doing. And we're going to hear more about that during the winter at Valley Forge. Another is two Polish men, Thaddeus Kosciuszko, I'm probably butchering that, an engineer who helped build forts, and Casimir Pulaski, who trained the cavalry. So he was known for his horseback military skills. All right. And so our next subject is going to be that winter at Valley Forge. So while the Americans flew high after that victory at Saratoga, the following winter was going to be difficult for the Continental Army. And remember that while there had been a victory at Saratoga, Washington to the south hadn't been faring as well. So let's see. After the victory, the Army prepared for the winter of 1776 through 1778. This is the colonial, or rather Continental Army, by camping at Valley Forge. And so let's look together at a quick story in the book, page 23. Here we go. All right. So General Howe did not try to recapture Philadelphia again until spring came. Then there was a great battle in which both armies lost about 1,000 men. The British army was much larger, so the Americans slowly backed off. Summer and fall passed, and the army made a winter camp at Valley Forge in Pennsylvania. It would be a winter of awful suffering. The men built log huts. They were small, drafty, and smoky. There was not enough food, and their clothes were ragged. Some had no shoes and left bloody footprints in the snow. Washington wrote to Congress that nearly 3,000 of his men were barefoot or otherwise naked. Sometimes there was no food at all. Most of the time there was very little. Many of the men had only piles of straw for a bed. What a horrible time. While the British army in Philadelphia had parties and banquets, the patriots suffered cold, hunger, and sickness. Many of the soldiers died, but though Washington was sad over the suffering of his soldiers, he never gave up. He encouraged them by keeping them busy. A German soldier named von Steuben, that's the German guy, came to help train them. Day after day, he taught them more about fighting. They drilled and drilled. Slowly, they became confident enough, even though they were hungry. All right. And so, let's look at this. Again, 2,000 huts were built as a shelter. Several soldiers lacked proper uniforms. Disease was rampant. So I think we understand when we study war that you're going to have problems with food that isn't cooked properly, water not coming from clean sources, and also the proper disposal of waste. My husband, who was in the Marine Corps as a logistician, has said one of the first things you do when you're on a deployment and you're setting up camp is you have to dig toilets, because if you don't, if you just use the restroom anywhere, sickness will spread in this way. So these are all common problems in military camps. All right. One thing to note, patriots and women offered help with food and medicine, clothing, ammunition, and some women, usually matrons, okay, because a young unmarried lady isn't going to want to be hanging around with these men, seeing them in various states of perhaps undress, needing help with sickness, whatever. So matrons, married ladies, would come and nurse the ill. Sometimes a wife would go to her husband. Martha Washington went to her husband. But there was an upside to this long winter, which was that von Steuben was able to drill his men and get the Washington's men in fighting order. And the weather then turned, got warmer, spring came, and the future was then faced with optimism. And that is all I wanted to lecture you about today. Again, I'm going to ask you no note passing, no eyelash curling, no hair curling, no hair combing in my class, guys. Come on. I want to give you a little taste of what the classroom is like, right? No one can go to the nurse. I'm sorry, the bathroom pass is closed, all that good stuff that really makes up part of the classroom we're missing together, right? So I will have an assignment for you to do that goes with this. So until next time, toodaloo.